IVM।
संसार के सारे मेहनत कश खेतों से मिलों से निकलेंगे, बेघर बेदर बेबस इंसान तरीक बिलों से निकलेंगे। दुनिया अमन और खुशहाली से फूलों से सजाई जाएगी, वो सुबह हमी से आएगी, वो सुबह हमी से आएगी। This is the final verse of the poem वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी by Sahir Ludhianvi. The poem is an ode to us, the future we want and how we build it. The story of India is a story of triumph. It's also a story of pain. You can't really celebrate India without remembering the freedom movement and everything that comes with it. This week, we celebrate both the Pakistani Independence Day on 14th August and the Indian Independence Day on 15th August. Now, I know that half the people listening to this podcast are already planning their trips to Goa tomorrow. But consider what's happening in this country now with the abrogation of Article 370. Since the amendment was announced, the Pakistan government has suspended trade ties with India, expelled the Indian High Commissioner, and recalled its own High Commissioner. It's now trying to take the issue to the United Nations Security Council. Hello and welcome to States of Anarchy, a podcast on global affairs and foreign policy. I'm your host, Hamsini Hariharan. I don't know if you've lived in Kashmir or have strong opinions about it, but now would be a good time to take a good look at the way we talk about things about which we differ. It's a good time to talk about democracy and state power and national security. But we aren't really talking to each other, are we? We're shouting into an abyss on Twitter and WhatsApp. So I thought now would be a good time to talk about peace. What does it constitute? How can we teach it? And how can we be better citizens advocating for peace? My guest for today is someone who spent countless hours in and out of classrooms talking about peace. Chintan Modi is an educator, writer, and peace builder. He's a fellow with the Pragya Trust on their Education for Peace initiative. He has worked with Seeds of Peace and the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. Chintan has represented India at peace-building forums in Nepal, Pakistan, USA, Saudi Arabia, and Germany. So I decided to talk to him about peace building and what the other side of the border looks like. But before we delve into the conversation, let's take a short break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You know, I have been asking you guys to do this. I think some of you are, but some of you aren't. Have you told your best friend about your favorite podcast? Please make sure you do that as well. You are our ambassadors. If you don't go out and evangelize on our behalf, who's going to do it? So please go out and tell somebody about the podcast you're listening to. If you think there's somebody who would enjoy it, refer them to IVM Podcast and tell them about all the stuff that they can find on our app or on our website or, Spotify, Savan, everywhere you're listening to podcasts, right? Just give it a shot. Also, guys, I'm going to be at Podcast Movement the coming week from the 13th to 16th of August. Podcast Movement is a conference in Orlando where we're going to be doing all kinds of podcasty stuff. So check it out. If you're in the area, please do come by and say hi. If you're not in the area, you can follow along with me by following, my social media in this case is Doshi Amit on most things. On the scene and the unseen, Amit Verma is joined by Pratik Sinha, co-founder of Alt News. They speak about living in the era of fake news, the far-reaching consequences of fake news, and the best way to debunk fake news. The English Premier League has begun and Football Twaddle is back with a new season. This season, they're introducing a Fantasy League episode which airs every Thursday along with regular episodes on Tuesday. Make sure you tune into both of them. On the last episode of this season of the Sponge Podcast, host Ambi Parmeshwaran talks about learning lessons from simple people and shares the story of Goosebuy. On Tech Careers in the New, presented by Accenture, Sheila Aditya is joined by Gopali Contractor, Managing Director, Artificial Intelligence at Accenture. They talk about AI, ways to demystify it, its practical applications, and the career opportunities in this field. Check it out. I think you'll like this show. On Pulyabazi, the Hindi policy podcast, host Saurabh and Pranay talk to Mihir Mahajan, a patent strategy expert about intellectual property rights. On The Origin of Things, Chuck narrates a brand origin story that involves priests, traders, and education. Will you be able to guess the brand before Chuck reveals it? Find out by tuning in. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by nutrition and lifestyle coach Rashi Malhotra. They talk about food substitutes and recipes for a healthy life. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back to States of Anarchy. I'm Hamsini Hariharan, and I'm talking to Chintan Modi about peace building and Pakistan. Hi, Chintan. Welcome to States of Anarchy.
Hi, Hamsini. Thank you for having me here.
So, in international relations, we sort of believe that the world is anarchical. Even like the name of this show, States of Anarchy, sort of talks about how states as primary actors deal with this system that primarily pits them against each other, right? So Thomas Hobbes famously said, the life of man is short, nasty, brutal, solitary, and just like a horrible place to be in. Against the backdrop of all of this, how would you define peace?
That's an interesting question. I think I would define peace differently at different times.
Okay.
Right now, I think peace is an alternative to violence. Not really the absence of violence, but a conscious choice one makes to disengage from violence.
So what you're saying is it's not just the absence of war, but there are other conditions that would mean that it's not peaceful? Would that make sense?
Since we're talking Hobbes, maybe I should bring in another theorist.
Okay.
Johann Galtung, and he talks about positive peace and negative peace, which has been criticized a bit, but I think it offers good analytical framework. So when one talks about negative peace, one talks in terms of peace being the absence of war or violent conflict. When one speaks of positive peace, it's more about conditions that would enable equality, justice, freedom, other values that one thinks of as important. So then one is talking not only about physical harm caused to people, but structural and cultural violence.
All right.
And what can be done to remove those.
That sounds like a fair definition to me. And how would you sort of describe what peace building is? Because I know that you identify as someone who works in peace building, right?
Yes.
So what is peace building?
I think the word peace building really comes from a particular historical trajectory.
Okay.
There was a time when one spoke of conflict management, and then the lingo was conflict resolution, and then one eventually moved to conflict transformation. And I think peace building is most closely linked to that, where the people or the entities ensuring peace are not only the people at the top, not only the heads of state, but various networks of stakeholders that are involved in a conflict. So here, for example, if we took the example of India and Pakistan, Imran Khan and Narendra Modi are not the only actors that are responsible for maintaining peace or building peace. But the people involved are journalists from both sides, educators from both sides who teach the history of the subcontinent, diplomats, of course, that are engaging in official lines of dialogue, but also business people from both sides that would sort of lobby for certain policies related to trade between both countries. So I think peace building is an approach to looking at how various categories of people can participate in improving ties between countries.
I, for one, am very relieved to hear that Imran Khan and Narendra Modi are not the only two stakeholders of peace building.
Some might even argue that they have nothing to do with peace. But
I agree.
I think I'm more confident in Modi than Imran Khan. Not because my surname is Modi.
Well, I was going to accuse you of that bias. But how did you start working in peace building? You have a degree in literature, right? English literature. So how did that sort of transition, I guess?
Do you want the academic reasons or the personal one?
Both.
Okay. So this is sort of funny. I've even written about it before. But as a kid, when people would ask me, when you grew up, where would you like to go? And I said Pakistan. It was the weirdest thing for an Indian child to say,
Now on Twitter,
right?
if you said that, you would get sent to Pakistan. People would send you tickets.
I think I'd like to go to New York instead of Lahore, though I love Lahore a lot, but still. Anyway, so yeah, that was the thing. And when I was in second grade, the Hindu-Muslim riots of 92-93 were happening. That left a significant imprint on my mind. Even as I was transitioning from school to college, the Gujarat riots happened. So there was somewhere this sense of, we talk about India as a country where people live together, yet there has been so much violence in the name of religious identities. And as someone who's wanted to be an educator since grade 1, I was thinking from an early time, like, what might it mean to be a teacher and also to address this?
Okay.
But I think it took a lot of time to crystallize. I was a school teacher in 2000 12
Okay.
when the school I used to teach at was part of this project called Exchange for Change. And children from India and Pakistan got an opportunity to write letters to each other, meet each other. And I was one of those school teachers who went from India to Pakistan with the kids.
Okay. And how old were these kids?
They were in 8th, 9th and 10th grade.
Okay.
So let's say 14, 15? 15, 16 maybe.
Okay.
And the story behind that is also a little weird because the history department head of the school was chosen to go, and her in-laws very dramatically said, "हमारे घर की बहू पाकिस्तान नहीं जाएगी, तो कौन जाएगा?" I was like, "मैं जाऊँगा."
It's a great origin story.
Yeah, so, and when I came back from that first visit in 2012, it was just 5-day visit, but I had such a profound, moving experience that I felt like I needed to do something with my work as an educator that had to move from being an English teacher to being a peace educator. Because very few Indians will ever have the opportunity to go to Pakistan if our visa rules are going to be so stringent. And I wanted to bring back what I'd learned and share it with children, with teachers back here, and see how a teacher could be involved in improving ties between both countries. And then formal training in peace and conflict resolution happened after that.
Okay. So how was that visit like? Your first visit to Pakistan? Where did you go? How was it for you? What did you have in your mind before you were visiting? How did that change?
There were people who were really resistant to my going. My parents were supportive. They were worried, but they were supportive. I think they've grown used to me doing things that are unconventional. So their way of approaching everything is, let him do whatever he wants. Our response to it is going to pray that he's safe. Okay.
Because prayers work usually.
Yeah, they do. I do believe in prayer. So, and I remember a cousin of mine telling me that you have to get a really good photograph of yourself because the Pakistanis will not send you back, and we need something at your prayer ceremony after you die.
Wow.
That's the kind of that's the kind of send off that I had.
Okay.
But I had this feeling that I would have a great experience. I don't know what exactly it would be like. I didn't know it would be so beautiful and overwhelming. Let me tell you a bit about the program that this was part of. It was called Exchange for Change, and the Citizens Archive of Pakistan had put it together.
Okay.
With a Delhi-based NGO called Roots to Roots, like ROUTES to ROOTS.
Okay.
So they'd organized this thing with, I think, funding from the British High Commission.
Okay.
And they were doing Pakistan, India, Pakistan, US, and Pakistan, some other place kind of exchanges for children.
All right.
And it was a bit like a junket.
Okay. In what sense?
Because we were staying at the Avari, which is fancy. So, like, imagine, bringing children and teachers to stay at the Taj.
Oh, okay.
It was a bit fancy in that sense.
And where was this? Lahore?
Lahore. So, they were doing it for security reasons.
Sure.
Because we had 21 people, including students and teachers, and they needed to put us in a place where there would be high security. One of the stereotypes I carried in my mind was that a lot of women would be wearing burqas, and that wasn't the case. I've probably seen more burqa-wearing women in Bombay than Lahore. So that was,
That's interesting because I was recently planning a trip to Pakistan, and I was telling my mother, you should come with me. So we backpacked across Sri Lanka, and we had a great time. And I was like, you should come with me. We'll do Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. She was like, yeah, but I'll have to wear a burqa. And then I was like, you really don't have to. Most of the Pakistani women I'm friends with and I met don't wear burqas, and it's fine. But that's the sort of image that you have of Pakistan because it's an Islamic state, right?
Absolutely. And I think we're more used to Muslims perform Muslim identity as minorities in India. So we try to take that picture and slap it onto other Muslim countries. And Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are not the same. I think it's important for people to know that. Though, of course, there is a lot of Saudi money in Pakistan.
Yeah, and creeping Wahhabism. But that's a different security-based
There's a funny thing that I read, actually, when I was in Pakistan. There's this artist called Fawzia Minallah, who's written a lot about people and banyan trees in Pakistan.
Okay.
And she says that there are people who've actually cut banyan and peepal trees in Pakistan saying that they're Hindu trees. So, and they've started replacing them with Saudi trees.
Oh, God.
Because that's more like close, akin to their culture. Yeah, it's crazy, but trees can't have religion, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I would think so.
And so many Sufi shrines are under trees or around trees.
Yeah.
It's more of a South Asian thing than a Hindu thing, I would say.
That's true. I agree with you. So after this visit to Lahore, you did some training in peace building. And
Oh, I forgot to tell you what the Lahore trip was about. So
Yes.
we were actually visiting schools in Lahore.
Okay.
And they also wanted to show us important historical sites. So we saw the Lahore Fort. We went to Dera Sahib, the Gurdwara in Lahore. The schools had some things lined up for us. So one school actually had this thing which looked like a mehendi or sangeet at an Indian wedding.
Okay.
Because the kids were performing a medley of Bollywood songs. And they had dhol players to welcome us.
It's sort of like Cultural Day or Parents' Day that you have.
Yeah,
in
so it was
some
like a
schools.
5-year-old dancing to I Want to Be Your Chammak Challo. And I'm like, okay, I did not expect to be welcomed into Pakistan like this. But I think the more poignant experience was at a school assembly one morning where we heard Pakistani children sing the Indian national anthem.
Okay.
That was totally unexpected. You know, even now as I speak, I have gooseflesh when I think of that day. So we are so used to thinking about Pakistanis as people who hate Indians that we can't imagine they would actually put in the effort to learn the Indian national anthem. Like, I have never thought of learning the Pakistani national anthem. Have you?
No, I couldn't. I wouldn't even be able to tell the Pakistani national anthem apart from other songs. To be
Yeah,
honest.
so that was really moving. And all of us, the Indians who had gone, they were crying when we saw that. And the kids were holding, like one kid holding a Pakistani flag, the other kid holding an Indian flag. And there were 2 rows of Indian and Pakistani flags like this. And at that time one realizes, you know, the power of symbols. I mean, here in India, when we have these debates around why play the national anthem before a movie starts, and we don't sometimes see the value that these symbols and songs and poems carry. But when one is in another country and something like that happens, it strikes you totally
Yeah, I
differently.
think most people become more nationalistic when they sort of step outside India, and most cases, I would say, because that becomes part of your identity, right? Your larger identity is that you are Indian, and therefore these symbols that mean very little to you when you're home suddenly start to take a larger context, I think.
Yeah, but some of it seems false also, right? Like, I mean, I remember going to... it's also being an Indian in Pakistan is so different from being an Indian in the US. I remember going to the Seeds of Peace camp in 2014.
Okay.
Where
is this?
This is in Maine.
Okay.
So the Seeds of Peace camp in Maine has been happening for several years. They bring together high school students from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, and USA.
Okay.
And I was one of the delegation leaders. So there are 2 educators chosen every year from India who go with the students. We met the Pakistani delegation in Dubai itself because the flight from Dubai to Boston was going to be the same for both of us. And when we went to Boston, the US delegation and the Middle East delegation saw the Pakistanis and the Indians getting along so well, right? Because we had already spoken to each other and we shared so much in common and, Bollywood conversation and all that.
Yeah.
And they were like, why are you here? There is no conflict between you. So it's also different, na? Like, where are you as an Indian? Because being in Pakistan, you're also thinking of, I'm in like enemy country or hostile territory at least.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when you go to a place like the US, you're suddenly just reduced to brown people in one sense. I remember when I was there last year, a bunch of... so I was at a program with Indians, Pakistanis and Nepalis. And one night we were all going to someone's house for a party, and each of us had to bring like someone from another nationality to come with us. So the person who I got was Costa Rican. His name is Ernie. And... you know how when you put like brown people in a bus, we all start singing at one point?
Yes.
So I was translating every song to my friend. And then he was just like, how do all of you know the lyrics? Is there some sort of thing that happens to you? But I thought your countries were at war. And I was trying to sort of explain to him that our countries were in a state of conflict with each other, but most people grow up in circumstances that are peaceful, and therefore we share a lot of each other's cultures, if that made sense.
I think Bollywood might have done a lot for diplomacy between India and Pakistan, and which probably should be studied in depth.
Yeah.
I mean, not just from the economics angle, of course, like Indian films have a huge market in Pakistan, but also the fact that the actors in Indian movies come from fairly diverse backgrounds as far as religion goes. So when one is looking at Bollywood, one isn't really thinking of like Indian as Hindu and Pakistan as Muslim, right?
Yeah.
That binary is challenged by Bollywood, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Bollywood is nuanced, okay?
I would be the last person to agree with the idea that Bollywood is nuanced. But
I did like Bajrangi Bhaijaan.
I think that is something that we are never going to agree on. Just personally, I apologize. But, all of this drives back to the point that you would think that people in India have a profound mistrust of each other. And I think in a lot of cases it's true. Just this seems like a self-evident question, but why do people have such a mistrust towards each other on both sides of the border?
I think the mistrust is learned. In families that have experienced the partition, I'm sure people grow up with stories of grandparents who were hurt in some way or even killed during that time. And there is a lot of literature on intergenerational trauma, and I think that's something to think about. When we talk about India-Pakistan relations and we talk about policy and war and all of that, we don't talk about the psychological aspect of it. But I think that is definitely something to be thought about. And I think it's also the education system plays a significant role, right? When we learn about the freedom struggle or the independence movement, the Muslim League sort of just appears at some point of time. We don't really, I didn't really learn more about the context in which that emerged, or how the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabha interacted with each other. And what was Jinnah doing? We just think of him as a villain figure, but he had close ties with Nehru and Gandhi and various other people in that movement. And how did he contribute? What was Iqbal doing? And, how did he come to write Sare Jahan Se Achha and then become the national poet of Pakistan? So these are questions that we don't encounter much, and we just taught that these are enemy countries. I don't think there is much of a space to look at the grey areas or even look at the fact that there was no consensus really on, having this kind of separation. I reviewed this book for Pragati. I can't remember the name right now, but it's about...
the partition.
I can't remember the title right now, but the subheading is Muslims Against the Muslim League.
Okay.
I can't remember the title, but anyway, the broader point was that the kind of rhetoric we hear now about, Muslims or Kashmiris being told to go to Pakistan, it seems like there was this unanimous decision made at that time that, one country is for Muslims, one country is for Hindus. And firstly, children are not allowed to question much in our education system. So even if they have those questions and they think that the textbook is talking bullshit, they can't say it. But even the teacher who wants to say it would be afraid because, what if someone's going to report them?
Yeah. There's going to be a backlash against the teacher
Exactly.
who says Pakistanis are not bad, they're just people like you and me. I'm going to guess that there will be backlash.
And I think media contributes usually too, right? Who are the people who are invited to shows about India-Pakistan relations? Typically, these are people who are shouting very much.
Yeah.
And are saying, unko karara jawab dena hai, let's give them a tough answer kind of thing. We don't really hear too many peace activists or educators or even sane diplomats on these shows.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I think the legacy of partition is something that we haven't dealt with as a country. It's something that people have tried to document and that's about it. But they don't, I think, consider, as you said, the intergenerational trauma that comes with it. Something that I wonder often about is how do not all states went through the trauma of partition. So how do people in the South, for example, reckon with it? How do they perceive it? What sort of things do they think about Pakistan when it comes to the fore? Because they seem to share the same mistrust as people elsewhere in the country, which would then drive into your second point that says that, these are... I don't know if we can call them mistakes, but these are the narratives that our history textbooks are feeding us. And it clearly villainizes one over the other. And I'm sure this is not something that's restricted to India alone. When I remember reading this article that compared history textbooks between India and Pakistan, and they shared profoundly different things about the same history of the subcontinent. And so they were talking about how in Pakistan, for example, most of medieval India, they don't talk about any of those kingdoms. They just start with the Muhammad of Ghazni, the Muhammad of Ghori, and then go onwards from there.
With Muhammad bin Qasim.
Yeah, all of that. And then they go with Mughal India, whereas Indian history will give you half a paragraph on some 13 illustrious kingdoms from across the country and then leave it at that. But I don't know, as an educator, how do you think, what can historians do to sort of make these various histories more accessible to children? How can you build different narratives and allow space for people to say there are different versions of the truth and they'll always sort of be contentious, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I think historians are already doing, educators are already doing. There was this beautiful NCERT textbook which had a chapter on partition. And I remember Professor Anil Sethi, who was earlier at Delhi University and then at Azim Premji University, worked on that chapter.
Okay.
What's beautiful about it is that he did fieldwork in Pakistan when he was writing this chapter for an Indian government textbook. And the chapter begins with 3 narratives, which were oral history narratives that he collected while working at the archive. And that gives students an entry point into learning about the event through a much broader lens. There are comparisons between the partition and the Holocaust in that particular chapter. It also has a large section on gender and violence, which draws heavily on Urvashi Butalia's work in The Other Side of Silence. And I think this is new stuff. I haven't seen Indian textbooks venturing into these spaces before. And for a government textbook to do that is quite surprising and remarkable, I would think. I don't know how long it's going to remain that way, but that's definitely something to look at. And I think we also miss regional narratives, as you were saying. So, I think you were referring to the work of the History Project when you mentioned comparative work of
that was the History Project.
Comparative analysis of textbooks. So I think the History Project has done... I think the intention is good to see how one event is covered in an Indian textbook and a Pakistani textbook. But the examples they've selected are the worst examples of Indian textbooks. I think because they were not able to find good examples of Pakistani textbooks. So I think there's also a danger in saying that there's one event, there's a Pakistani view of it, and there's an Indian view of it. Because there are multiple views in India and in Pakistan, right?
Yes.
So if you look at a textbook in Gujarat, might be different from a textbook in Kashmir. Because our country is so huge. Of course, one can debate whether Kashmir is part of India or not, but that can be a later debate. Yeah. And also diversity in terms of whether a school is using a textbook by a private publisher, is it using a government textbook, is it an IB school that allows the teacher to create their own curriculum? So I have been invited by history teachers into their class, and when I've gone to a school that follows an IB curriculum, I've been able to bring oral histories into the classroom. These could be videos, these could be a graphic novel based on the experience of partition, these could be art objects, this could actually be a Skype conversation with a Pakistani author. So those are experiences that textbooks can't make possible. But if there are schools that have the willingness or the resources, that can happen.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Something that I've wondered is how do children respond to this? Because a lot of them, as we said, grow up with this intergenerational trauma, right? So, and this is essentially the idea that their frameworks are sort of being contradicted, I guess, of what they've been taught to believe. So how do children, I don't know, as young as 13, 14, I'm guessing is what you've been teaching, how do they respond to what you're telling them about Pakistan and what's happening on the other side?
So when I'm doing peace education workshops, I'm typically not telling children, but I'm offering activities that involve them in speaking to each other or responding to maybe a video clip that I'm showing them or involving them in a theater exercise that they have to debrief. Sometimes these kids are middle and high school, but sometimes they've been younger.
Okay.
I think I just respond to an invitation from a school and see what to do. What I like to do, I mean, when I just came back from Pakistan, I was full of enthusiasm saying that, I will be this peacemonger who will do all I can to change people's ideas because there's so much hate. It's taken me some time to calm down a bit and meet people where they are instead of focusing so much on what I want them to think. I think that can be self-defeating in some way because people want a chance to articulate their hate, their anxiety, their confusions, and good pedagogy makes space for that. Otherwise, it becomes another sort of propaganda, right? So they might listen to you because they're supposed to listen to an adult in the class, but that may not really have an impact on their heart and mind. So I don't stop anyone from saying they hate Pakistan. If they want to, they can say that. But then they've got to justify where they do. So I say, okay, you think like this about Pakistan. Where did you hear this? Or who said this to you? Have you read a book where you've come across this? That helps us get to the source of where it came from. And then I ask them, okay, so you have heard all of this on TV. Have you ever seen Pakistani coverage of the same news? They're like, no, why would I see Pakistani coverage? I said, don't you think people on the same side might not be seeing Indian coverage and might be hating Indians the same way? So when we engage in a process like that, I think there's an opening up that doesn't happen if we go with the assumption that these are bigoted individuals and I am the one who's thinking right. I have come to reform them. I think peace educators need to be a little more humble and it's taken some beating to realize that. I think even among children from partition families, I've noticed different responses. There are children who are very excited about the prospect of visiting the place where their grandfather or grandmother spent their childhood. And there are some people who have begun to hate that country so much that they don't want to have anything to do with the place that is a memory of pain for their family. It also depends so much on how adults present the history, right? There are children who come from well-off families that have traveled to maybe Dubai or America, Australia, Europe, and they have interacted with Pakistanis there. So that first-hand interaction is very different from seeing a Pakistani only on a TV channel. So there might be people who have only seen Fawad Khan and Hafiz Saeed. So that's the idea of Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
And it's so, I mean, one is a film star and the other is a terrorist. But what about the ordinary Pakistani like you and me? So I think that's something that has an impact on people's understanding. Also, I think there are certain qualities, right? I mean, and this doesn't have to do about Indian or Pakistani. I think there are some people who are scared of difference. And there are some people who approach difference with curiosity. So I have this theater exercise where I place a vacant chair in front of the students and I ask them to imagine there's a Pakistani sitting there. They can assign whatever age, gender, sexual orientation, profession, all sorts of identity markers that they want to attach to them and have a conversation with them. So they can say anything that they want to. They can just interact through gestures. They can ask questions. And it's really interesting to observe who they imagine to be in the chair.
Okay. Is there a general trend of who they imagine it to be, or?
No, it's diverse. And there have been times when they imagine a general sitting there. And when I ask them, okay, why are you imagining a general? Because they associate Pakistani with army-run state. So that's their imagination. There are people who might imagine a school child in Pakistan. Because they're like, okay, my experience is that of a child going to school, so I'm going to imagine someone on that side. And I'll ask him, like, do you go with a gun to school?
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And I've also I do this exercise where it's open and they can attach the identity marker. And then I began to attach that. So I say, okay, so imagine the Pakistani sitting in front of you is a 70-year-old grandmother. So the person who was earlier really angry and was questioning the general and saying, like, why have you come to India? This same person goes and touches the feet of that lady. Because, like, what do you do to a grandmother? You touch their feet and seek blessings. So through that activity, the process of humanization happens in a way that cannot happen through lecturing.
That's very powerful. The exercise, just as you describe it, sounds very powerful.
Thank you.
Was that also true for you when you interacted with Pakistanis for the first time? Did they change the way you looked at them as people?
I went with the idea that I was going to have a good time and that I would be welcomed. So it was not that drastic for me. But I've seen attitudes of people around me change. So I remember that I told you my mother was a little worried about me going to Pakistan, right? I think she was more worried because like relatives made her worry more about me.
That's family in India.
Exactly. South Asian families.
Yeah.
So I think this was my second or third trip to Pakistan. Okay. And a friend of mine had taken me to visit this Jain neighborhood in Rawalpindi. My family happens to be Jain.
Okay.
And, we tend to think of partition typically as a Hindu-Muslim event. And we don't think of that much. We think of the Sikhs, yes, but we don't think so much of the Jains, the Buddhists, the Parsis.
The Christians,
the atheists, the agnostics, and the Jews who were probably affected by partition. So he took me to that Punjabi Jain neighborhood, and he also gave me a framed photograph of this sign that said Jai Jinendra, which is like a Jain greeting, which is from a Jain temple. And I brought that back home. And my mother was really touched to see that, right? As something like, so for her being Jain is really important. And then, that was coming together with something that was really important to me, which was like this cross-border friendship and peace. And so I've seen people feeling differently, or, when someone has sent like achar or chutney from the other side, and then my mom's like sharing it with her neighbors and relatives and saying, okay, look what my son got from there. And earlier there was so much anxiety about like, will you get vegetarian food there? So things change.
Because I have never been to Pakistan, will you get vegetarian food there?
You do get vegetarian food in Pakistan. I don't think the variety is as huge as India. So Pakistani friends of mine who are vegetarian love the food here.
Okay.
I remember going to a pizza place in Pakistan once, and they had one vegetarian pizza. Said, this is terrible. Like, why would I want to be here? We have just one kind of pizza. But to be honest, when I've been in Pakistan, my heart has been so full that I haven't thought that much about my tummy.
That's really sweet.
But Pakistanis love feeding people, and it's so common for Indian guests to be given 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 2 dinners, and multiple lassis and dessert in between. So they were quite upset.
That you were not having 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 2 dinners?
They felt that they could not extend the full range of the hospitality to me.
Ah, okay. But that's interesting. Tell me more about your experiences visiting Pakistan.
Sure.
What were all the cities that you visited?
I visited Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, and Rawalpindi.
Okay.
We have this ridiculous city-specific visa policy between our countries. So even if you get a visa to go to Pakistan, if you're an Indian getting a visa to go to Pakistan, or if you're a Pakistani getting a visa to come to India, you get a specific number of cities to go to, and you can't go to any other.
Yeah, in India, it's only Bombay and Delhi, right? I mean, Pakistanis coming to India, I think, can visit.
There are Pakistani authors who go to literature festivals in Kolkata and Bangalore.
Okay, that's good to know. Because I have some Pakistani friends, and I was telling them at some point that they should come to Chennai, where I'm from, and they were like, I'm not sure we'll be able to get a visa to Chennai. And then that struck me. Just very personally, because I felt like my hospitality then won't be I couldn't extend that to them.
Yes.
Right?
The Mahindra United World College in Pune has had 2 Pakistani students, or at least one that I know of. But yeah.
At this point, let's take a break.
This is the amazing story of something awesome. Once Chuck decided to start a podcast, and so he did. The end. Okay, that is a crappy story. But I've got some really cool stories over at my new show, The Origin of Things. On this podcast, I look at the stories of how brands came into being and sometimes evolved out of quite unexpected circumstances. And to make it really fun, I reveal the name of the brand and sometimes a category only at the very end. The show is 5 to 7 minutes per episode and perfect for trivia junkies and brand nerds, especially those with short attention spans. New episodes out every Wednesday on IVM Podcasts app or website, or any podcast app or site that you happen to prefer. End of story. They lived happily ever after.
Welcome back after the break. You're listening to States of Anarchy, and I'm Hamsini Hariharan. So you visited all these cities, despite this stupid city-specific visa rule. And what was the difference between the cities? How were they?
My favorite is Lahore.
Why?
Punjabis have this saying, I don't speak Punjabi well, so I will not try to say it because it'll Punjabis will come and gag me. So basically there's this saying that if you haven't seen Lahore, you're not born. But that's literal. If you just take the meaning of it, means like you haven't lived if you haven't seen Lahore. I would say... well, that's not fully true, but it is certainly a place worth seeing. It was the cultural capital of Punjab in that time, and it is fairly diverse. One of the things that really surprised me when I went to Lahore the first time, they took us to the Lahore Fort, which has a plaque saying, Lahore is named after Love, who was Ram's son in Ramayana. I was like, okay, I was not expecting this. And they said Kasur, the other city, was named after Kush.
Oh. Okay.
I don't know about the historicity of this, but the fact that despite the ghettoization in our minds, there are evidences of a history that is more diverse than we imagine. And even, more recently, reading about the Buddhist history of what is now called Pakistan, I think that's been more exciting to me because I've been exploring Buddhist practice more and more, and it just... makes me think about what it would be like if India and Pakistan began to explore Buddhist pilgrimage as a way of cultural diplomacy, and how that would open up so many avenues of interaction and even revenue generation for both countries. I mean, we are already exploring like the Kartarpur corridor, which is the announcement has happened recently, and for Buddhist pilgrims to be going from here, I think that would be fantastic. But anyway, coming back to your question about what the cities were like. So I know I get carried away. I get so emotional about this topic.
That's completely fine.
So typically, analogies are drawn between Lahore and Delhi, Karachi and Mumbai. I did enjoy Karachi, but my friends were more worried about my safety in Karachi than in Lahore.
Oh, is it that Karachi is the more unsafe city?
I wouldn't make such a generalization, but I've heard more people in Karachi talking about their experience of getting mugged than in Lahore.
Oh, okay. And Karachi is in Sindh?
Karachi is in Sindh, yes.
Okay.
The food in Karachi is a lot more diverse, so I think you'll get more vegetarian food in Karachi.
Okay.
I remember eating masala dosa in Karachi and having imli ka sharbat, which was fantastic.
I did not think that would be the thing that you do in Karachi, eating a masala dosa. Did it do any justice to my South Indian roots?
No, absolutely not. And even the pav bhaji was really bad in Lahore. But
I can imagine the Pakistanis listening to to this podcast go like, yeah, Chintan, come to our country, eat our food and then go back and visit.
no, I think what I enjoyed most in Pakistan was the homemade food. Because I remember very distinctly this experience of going to a friend's home in Karachi.
Okay.
And her mother told me that she grew in what was called United Provinces back then, right? Now UP, Uttar Pradesh. And she tried to recall what her Hindu neighbor used to cook. And she made those dishes for me because I'm vegetarian. I think that was like completely out of the world. I mean, you can't compare a hotel meal to something someone has made with so much love and because aap Hindustan se aaye, right? Actually, because aap Hindustan se aaye was something that a security guard at the Lahore National College of Arts in Lahore told me.
Okay.
He said, why don't you come to my house? I live in Nankana Sahib, which is birthplace of Guru Nanak. And, if you have a visa to Lahore, you can't go to Nankana, though it's like 45 minutes, I think, far away from there. So I said, I won't be able to go for that reason, but you're so kind. Thank you. And he said, okay, aap Hindustan se aaye hain, so I have to bring you something. So he made my friend and me sit there and he brought us ice cream.
Oh, that's really sweet. And which makes me wonder, how did people react to you being from India in Pakistan through your trips?
A lot of people just assumed I'd be vegetarian so it's like Indian is equal to Hindu is equal to vegetarian.
Okay.
Which is a connection one would not make in India, right?
Yeah.
I would not make
I would not make that
I would not assume
either.
that someone who's Indian is vegetarian. And of course, Indian is equal to Hindu is completely out of question. So that was interesting to notice. And I think even when I went on the school trip the first time, there were Pakistani teachers who were asking some of the Indian teachers, why don't you wear bindis? Because their idea of the Indian woman was the Star Plus soap opera woman. So they were expecting
Sari
and bindi, yes. So that was odd for them because they were wearing salwar kameezes. The food that I really enjoyed in Pakistan was something called aloo bukhare ki chutney.
Okay.
Oh my God, it's so good. So aloo bukhara is a plum, right?
Yeah.
And this was again, like the regular aloo bukhara ki chutney that you'll find in a hotel is different from the one made by a friend's mum. So I remember that very well. I remember going to Anarchy Bazaar in Lahore at 3 a.m. and having the kulfi. I remember having the langar meal at Gurdwara Dera Sahib in Lahore. So those were special.
Yeah, it really sounds lovely. Yeah.
So after I was doing this for a while, going to schools and doing workshops and interactions, I decided to, well, not really formalize it, but to just think of a framework that would give it more strength, at least in my mind.
Okay.
So I started this initiative called Friendships Across Borders.
Okay.
And the Desi name was Aao Dosti Kare. The idea initially was to collect stories of Indians and Pakistanis who had become friends, either because they had studied together or met at a conference or just become friends online. Because a lot of Indians and Pakistanis are becoming friends online, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to apply to the Ministry of External Affairs to become Twitter friends or Facebook friends, thankfully. And with technology, I think people are getting so much access to each other's lives, even without having physically met. So I was recording some of those stories and then doing more workshops with schools. I'm not doing as many right now, but I think people did begin to show interest. And sometimes teachers were responding to events that they saw on the news, which they felt had to be responded to. So I remember there was a lot of violence happening against Kashmiris in some part of India at some point of time. And there was a school teacher who wanted me to come at that time and then talk about my visits to Pakistan. And there was an army kid in that class. So he began talking about how easy it is for people from non-army families to say that we should teach them a lesson and we should, destroy them. But they don't understand the emotional cost to children like him, who actually have to think of whether their father, or uncle, or older brother, or grandfather will come back. Yeah, of course, I mean, like, there should be mother, grandmother, aunt as well.
But that's a limitation of the army. But that's actually a really interesting point. How do you deal with narratives of hate primarily, but also of propaganda, of signaling, of strategy that primarily comes from state sources that are, of course, amplified by the media? How do you personally contend with them? How do you, initiate dialogue about what happens, particularly with respect to conflict, right? Every year, something that happens is when the snow melts across the borders at the LOC, there will always be some reports of insurgency, something or the other will happen. And this is when the media will be, on both sides, I'm guessing, will be at peak. We should bomb the country, or, we should teach them a lesson sort of mentality. Something will come up every single year. So how do you deal with these narratives of hate?
I think the people peddling narratives of hate often don't have any skin in the game, right? And it's easy to perpetuate these because you know that you're pretty safe in your air-conditioned office. Of course, we are recording in an air-conditioned office, but the point is different here.
I hope so. I hope we have skin in the game.
Yes, we do. Go back to the question.
No, the question was, how do you deal with narratives of hate?
How do I deal with narratives of hate? I think the activist response is to typically meet hate with hate. And that is what makes me uncomfortable. I am not trying to decry or diminish the importance of what activists have done. But I tend to identify as a peace educator, not as a peace activist, because I feel like hate should have a chance to express itself in a non-violent manner.
Okay.
So that we can understand where it comes from. Because when we don't understand where it comes from, how do we even respond to it? It's often coming from a wounded place. And it's not necessarily coming from an evil place. I don't believe in good and evil narratives. I mean, though I went to a Catholic school, and there's a tendency to, collapse the world into these binary categories. But I think this is not just about India and Pakistan, but even when we're looking at the polarization of discourse in our country, I think it's become so difficult for people to be friends with or to date or even to hook up with people who vote for another party. And why is that so, right?
I think we have a very difficult time separating ideas from people, and we place ideas above people in a lot of cases.
Well, some would say ideas make people.
Yeah, so how do you then separate the two? How do you separate narratives from people who believe them? Because at the end of the day, the personal is political, right? So...
So I will give you another example, which is not related to India and Pakistan. But I have a very dear friend who is Jewish. I did not know that he identifies as Zionist until very recently. Is that going to undo all the warmth I felt for him all of these years? No. Which means I have to grapple with the complexity of this person. Similarly, there are cousins, there are family members who... believe in ideologies that one might not believe in. Is one going to say, like, let's cut off all ties? Because I think it comes from a very purist sort of response. I think it imagines that, I mean, I don't know what the English expression for this is, but hum to doodh ke dhule hue hain, it's like that kind of approach, right? Like, there's everything perfect about me, everybody else needs to be fixed. And if one is going to take that approach, one will keep eliminating people from one's life. And eventually be left alone because nobody can be exactly like you.
That's fair. And when you take that back to sort of the India-Pakistan context, how do you delineate between the people who are peddling these narratives, the people who have skin in the game, and the people who are sort of just consuming all of these narratives? Because they're all very intertwined, right? And I don't know, at least with me, I am one of those people who say there's a difference between a government and its people. So what civil society does on its own time can't be reflected by what the government does. if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would say actually this is what you are saying is something that Narendra Modi also said, right?
Is it? Oh God.
Yeah.
I share something with Narendra Modi ji. This is great.
I think he said last year that we must distinguish between Pakistani people and the Pakistani government, right? I would also go so far as to say distinguish between the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military. I mean, that's the complexity of this, right? And I think, I don't know if it can be so simplistic again. Like, there's a tendency when Indians and Pakistanis get together at a peace conference to say, either blame it all on the British or the Americans
or
the Chinese or their own governments. But, of course, we also messed up, right? And it's our ancestors who've also messed up. So I think we can't, it's easy to like distract from that and say, let's separate. But it's not like all civil society is pro-engaging with the other country, right?
That's true.
Because with the civil society is not a uniform, homogeneous space. It's not like all activists who work... it's not like all activists are united even. There are activists who work on different causes. I remember being part of this delegation that went to Kashmir shortly after Burhan Wani's killing.
Okay.
And... this was a group of journalists, activists, photographers, various people. And there were activists who were telling Kashmiri people that they should align with other movements and struggles in India. And they were like, but we're not Indians. Why should we align with your struggles? So while it sounds funny, it makes sense in some way because we assume that, everybody who is associated with social and political movements and has a problem with the state is automatically together. And that's not true. There are people who may fight for Adivasi rights, but that does not mean that they believe that Kashmiris have the right to self-determination. Or there might be people who work for queer rights and are very Islamophobic.
Yeah, I've heard of some of these narratives as well. And people assume that, first they think that anything that's protesting against the state is the left. They may, and this is particularly true of mainstream media where they say, oh, the left is saying this and these leftists are arguing. But they forget that there is a lot of intersectionality. There is also not a lot of intersectionality. And you can't just put everyone across a spectrum of political beliefs into sort of one group.
And there are leftists who are fighting the caste system but totally benefiting from it, right?
Yeah.
That's there. And I think also our media uses the words left and liberal interchangeably. I think that's really stupid. I am part of media, you're part of media, but yeah, let's acknowledge that.
I completely agree. There are huge range of issues that the media can be accused of, particularly when it comes to agenda setting, right? There was this theory in international relations that liberals particularly championed that said that democracies do not go to war with each other because...
but with their own citizens, maybe.
Yeah. But their point was that, democracies are made up of people who are electing governments and people are fundamentally peaceful and people will not want to go to war with other people. But if you take an example of any conflict just between India and Pakistan, people want war. After, Pulwama, for example, you could see all these people on WhatsApp groups suddenly bursting out with self-righteous rage from I don't know where. But you could see that sort of belief that people fundamentally do not have war is not, a true narrative, is not representative, I guess, of realities, I think.
Yeah, I think it's easy to blame the politicians and the Arnab Goswamis of the world. They are the bloodlusting people and they are the warmongers. But examine the stance of people who say that there should be dialogue and peace between India and Pakistan. Where do they stand on capital punishment? So you might not have bloodlust on a particular issue, but you might want to kill people for another reason. And I think it's really important that we examine where is this desire for punishing people in a certain way coming from. I think we talk very little about restorative justice in our country. And when we think of justice, we typically equate it with retribution. And I think, that's something worth talking about. Also, since we're talking about liberals, have you come across this book called Peace, Love and Liberty by Tom Palmer?
No, I haven't.
I was reading it recently, and I think it's fantastic because it talks about how it makes an economic argument for peace.
Okay.
And it says if you're trading with someone, you're not likely to harm them.
Yeah, this is the idea that two countries that have McDonald's do not necessarily go to war with each other. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's just one of those. It's another liberal theory that
Maybe we can have dhabas instead of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Talking India, Pakistan.
It would be much better food, I'm sure. But what do people then do? What can citizens do, like ordinary people, do to sort of ensure peace? How can they be better citizens? I don't know if that would even equate, like if it would mean being better citizens. But okay, let me rephrase that. What can people do fundamentally if they want peace between two countries, if they want peace within their country? What should they do?
Well, one of the ways could be to read more fiction from Pakistan. I think when we engage with stories, we tend to connect better with people and their realities. And one might say, okay, but like literature is not really true stories. But I think that's a silly argument. I'm not saying that only as someone who studied literature, but not everyone is going to read a journal article, right, on India-Pakistan relations. They might actually watch a Pakistani TV show. Or they might read a novel by a Pakistani author. They might watch Coke Studio. And I think popular culture can have a huge impact in changing how we view the so-called enemy country. I think that's something people can definitely do and share that kind of stuff with their friends. The other is to actively seek out and participate in initiatives that are working for peace between India and Pakistan. Aghazi Dosti has been doing some really good work.
Okay.
They have been bringing out a calendar every year which has paintings by children from both countries.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, they also organize Skype conversations between children and teachers from India and Pakistan. So that's been happening.
Okay.
And I think this initiative is particularly significant because a lot of these exchanges are very elite exchanges, right? Like the tier 2, tier 3 dialogues. Even though one calls it peace building and conflict transformation, one says there are multiple stakeholders, but you need to have connections in high places to be invited to these things, right?
Yeah.
And one imagines that things will trickle down, but most people don't even write about their experiences after coming from such a thing. It just becomes something to
Put on their CVs.
put on their CV, yes. So I think that's there. Also, social media, I think, is making this process so much more organic. I think people who are not even calling themselves peace builders are becoming friends with people on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And just following someone's social media account is giving them access to what life is like on the other side. I think the beauty of social media is that you don't necessarily even need to have planned initiatives. People will do what they have to with it.
Yeah, and that would be sort of more organic, I guess, more natural, maybe. So this is my last question.
Oh, we're done already.
Yeah. If for someone who wants to know more about peace building between India and Pakistan, about, I don't know, just relations between India and Pakistan, what resources would you recommend? What books would you recommend that they start with?
What age are you looking at?
Through the ages, assume that the average listener of the show is 24 years old.
Oh, okay. But the 24-year-old might have siblings who are younger.
Yeah. Okay, so then give me like resources for different age groups. What would you recommend for children? What would you recommend for adults?
I really like using this book called Mukund and Riaz by Nina Sabnani.
Okay.
It was made as a film and became a book after that. Nina Sabnani is an animator, filmmaker who lives in Mumbai. Her father, I think, was 6 years or 8 years old when he had to migrate from Karachi to Mumbai.
Okay.
And the stories around that.
Okay.
So it's about Mukund and Riaz, these two kids who go to the same school, they love playing cricket. And one day when they're at school, they hear that there's this violence and they have to escape. The Hindu family is helped by a Muslim family to disguise themselves. And they say bye to each other on a ship. I mean, as they board the ship. So I like to share the short film with students and get them to respond. And it connects with people at various levels, not just the partition bit, but also there are students there are children who've had the experience of moving cities because their parents have transferable jobs. Or some child and this friend of theirs decided to go to another school. So separation and loss as a theme is something that people are able to connect with.
Yeah.
That book is something I recommend.
Okay. And for adults?
I would really recommend Urvashi Butalia's The Other Side of Silence. I think it's a very significant book. I love Urvashi Butalia's book because it takes into account the gender dimension of partition.
Okay.
And that is something that's not much talked about. I think even if it's a course design, typically anything that has to do with women or gender or queer people just gets assigned in the last week of the course, right?
Yeah, or it'll be one module that they have to finish because they had to cover
and that would be presented as the alternative reading.
Recommended.
Yes, exactly. Not the way of looking at something.
So this is Urvashi Butalia's?
The Other Side of Silence.
Okay.
That one. Then I love a series called A Children's History of Pakistan.
Okay.
Written by Hamida Khuro. She's no more. She was an educator and a politician in Pakistan.
Okay.
Who decided to write these series of books for her grandchildren.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there is a different book for each state in Pakistan. So there's a children's history of Punjab, a children's history of Sindh, a children's history of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I have 3 or 4 of those books. What's beautiful about these is that they're so different from the state narratives. And they're far more diverse in terms of how they represent who are Pakistani. So they do not conflate Pakistani with Sunni Muslim. There are Punjabi, Jain, Buddhist and Hindu histories built into these books.
Oh, okay.
And even, I think there's a whole chapter on Soni Mahwal as part of a history book. It's a legend, but it's in a history book. And because I think in South Asia, legend and history and mythology is so intertwined that I enjoy that book.
All right.
That's those set of books.
Okay.
Then Aanchal Malhotra's Remnants of a Separation. I enjoyed Aanchal's approach because she tells the story of the partition through objects that people carried with them at the time they were leaving their house.
Oh, wow.
And this has stories of people from both sides. It would be enjoyed particularly by people who like detailed descriptions of objects and also of emotional states. I think typically when we talk about these countries, we talk from a security studies perspective, right?
Yeah.
I have wanted to write a book. I haven't found the time. But I think it would be great to have a book that's funny, crazy, quirky, where Indians and Pakistanis talk about what it was like to visit the other country. Because I think there's too much serious stuff now.
Yeah, there is a lot of serious stuff out there. Thank you, Chintan. Do you have any final stories about Pakistan?
Yeah, I do actually. I don't know. As I visited Pakistan 4 times, mainly for academic or cultural exchanges. And I think this was the second time when I was crossing the Wagah border and returning. And the security person on the Indian side asked me, are you an Indian coming back home or are you a Pakistani coming to India? It was really profound because even a security guard cannot tell by the way your face looks whether you're Indian or Pakistani. He has to go to the document to verify who you are. And one wonders, while traveling across countries has become so much easier and cheaper from how it was a few decades ago. But it's also this kind of suspicion and anxiety and mistrust that borders and visa regimes have created. And I hope as we end this podcast that people who are children now and, are going to become adults, say in the next 5-10 years, I hope they have a lot more opportunities for Indians to travel to Pakistan, for Pakistanis to travel to India, so that the kind of hysteria, the hostility that has existed for so many decades goes away. Because we're not just losing so much money unnecessarily to keep up with this hatred, but we're just losing so many opportunities for friendships, for cultural exchange, to see such gorgeous places that exist in each other's countries, which have been untapped by the tourism industry, thankfully, so far. But yeah, there's so much culture. Like, I think there are times when I am outside the country and I like to call myself South Asian rather than Indian, because my sense of identity is also linked to the Indus Valley civilization in a way, right? Which can it really be claimed by India? Because even Pakistan claims it.
Yeah.
Or the kind of folklore, the stories we enjoy, the Sufi and the Bhakti poetry that we listen to, it's not really confined to the current political entity that is India. It flows through all of South Asia. Okay, I'm getting really emotional now. Let's stop this.
Yeah.
No, I'm not running away from emotions, okay? I don't think emotions and masculinity cannot go together.
Yeah,
okay, my God, I gave my gender spiel.
No, well, let's hope that there are fewer borders and more dialogue. But thank you so much, Chintan. Thank you for
Thank you,
coming on this
Hamsini.
podcast.
This was great.
That's it for this episode of States of Anarchy. Thank you for staying with us. I wish you a very happy Independence Week and suggest that you think a little bit more about peace and what you can do to build a better world. If you want to read more about peace building, then head over to the episode description where I've attached a bunch of resources for you. If you have any comments or questions, then feel free to reach out to me on Twitter @HamsiniH and on Instagram @States of Anarchy. If you're interested in the topics that States of Anarchy covers, I recommend signing up for the Takshashila Institution's online graduate certificate in public policy, where you can specialize in defense and foreign affairs. You'll get to learn what makes rich countries powerful, how to analyze and address emerging security challenges, and why diplomacy is a tool to achieve national security goals. The deadline for their next cohort is 1st September. Visit www.takshashila.org.in for more details. You can listen to States of Anarchy on the IVM podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week.
How aware do you think you are of your laws and rights? Do you look up to laws when you are caught up in situations? Do you know what your rights are when you're stuck somewhere bad? Well, here's a show that can help you move an inch closer to being aware of what your rights are. Tune into Know Your Qanoon with me, Amber Rana. This is a podcast meant to answer all your law-related queries. Catch Know Your Qanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
Did you know that Parsis in Mumbai, instead of being left at the Tower of Silence after they die, are now cremated? And why? Because a cow fell sick in the early 1990s. Did you know that the smog in Delhi is caused by something that farmers in Punjab do and that there's no way to stop them? Did you know that there wasn't one gas tragedy in Bhopal, but 3? One of them was seen, but 2 were unseen. Did you know that many well-intentioned government policies hurt the people they're supposed to help? Why was demonetization a bad idea? How should GST have been implemented? Why are all our politicians so corrupt when not all of them are bad people? I'm Amit Verma, and in my weekly podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, I take a shot at answering all these questions and many more. I aim to go beyond the seen and show you the unseen effects of public policy and private action. I speak to experts on economics, political philosophy, cognitive neuroscience, and constitutional law so that the insights can blow not only my mind, but also yours. The Seen and the Unseen releases every Monday. So do check out the archives and follow the show at seenunseen.in. You can also subscribe to The Seen and the Unseen on whatever podcast app you happen to prefer.